Hello, and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers with whatever writing ailments you might have.
Whether it's related to your craft or your career, we can help.
Are you ready for your session?
The doctors are in. Today, I have with me Nicholas Bruckman, the founder of People's Television, an award-winning studio in New York City and Washington, D.C. Nicholas is a director and producer who has created award-winning films, commercials, and web content for groups such as Greenpeace, Black Lives Matter, and TED, as in the TED Talks. His film, Valley of the Saints, won the Audience Award at Sundance, and most recently his documentary, Not Going Quietly, was supposed to premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2020, but we can probably guess what happened there. Welcome to the show, Nicholas.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here and to chat with you. The film did premiere later on, but it took took another year.
It was a delayed premiere. Well, that's really cool. We can talk about that more in a little bit. You know, this I wanted to interview you. Roshni and I were looking at People's Television, the website, and watching some of your trailers, and we thought, wow, this is really cool. This is some really good storytelling and a documentary level that, you know, we don't usually talk about. We usually talk about fiction and novels and things like that in films. So we were really interested to have you on. What drives you to want to do documentary filmmaking?
Great question. I think that it's really relevant for me to be here and to be chatting about this because I really feel that documentary is having a kind of renaissance moment. I think just economically, there's been a lot more interest and attention and higher prices paid by streamers for documentary content. Obviously, that's coming from audiences. But I think there's also just been a bigger recognition of documentary as a valid medium of cinematic storytelling. So much has happened, so much innovation and experimentation has happened with the medium. And in some ways that may seem obvious, but I'm struck sometimes by how much of a secluded offshoot we are often considered to the film industry. One example that I think really highlights it is that in the 70 plus years of the Oscars, no documentary has ever been nominated for a Best Picture or a Best Director award. Animated films have, for example, which you might think are different or not quite the same as regular filmmaking, but documentary has not. So we have still not yet come into our own. I think that's still, and it's an exciting time to push the medium forward. Relevant to the podcast, I mean, I think that writing is a huge part of documentary filmmaking. It's equally a part of storytelling as writing is on a narrative film. None of this is to say that I think documentary is a superior format or whatever competitive to narrative, but certainly we're sometimes competing for the same attention and interest and resources.
That's another question I had was, you know, I've worked a little bit with documentaries. A friend of mine did one and I helped out producing it. And we discovered quickly that the story of a documentary almost, you can't, I guess the question is, how do you write a documentary? Usually the story comes out of the filming and you kind of construct it, I don't want to say in the process of or after the fact. How much planning do you do ahead of time when it comes to developing what your story is going to be?
Right. So there's different types of documentary storytelling. The Not Going Quietly, the film that you referenced, that was supposed to premiere at
really
Tribeca.
amazing.
Thank you.
I just gotta say that was me. I saw the trailer, and just seeing the trailer really touched me. I was like, wow, this is really powerful stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, and that film had a very character-driven, what we call like cinema verite storytelling style, which meant we followed around Addie, the protagonist, for several years to tell his story as it unfolded. And there were a lot of twists and turns that we certainly couldn't have expected and couldn't have written in advance. And so you kind of write by filming and letting and of course you steer it in directions that you want it to go, not the person's life, but the way that the way you choose what to capture is to frame out what you think are going to be the important beats, but you have to constantly be shifting and adapting to what the story is going to be, so you know when to be where. You can't obviously film somebody 365 24/7 yet, but we almost did that with Addie. We filmed for over 100 days on the film, which is really extensive. over the course of those few years. And what uh, the writing process, which was very long and intensive, was between myself and my co-writer Amanda Roddy. Our editor Kent was also an additional writer on the film, and the three of us really took all of the interviews and all of the material that we had captured in this film over the course of that time, and we wrote it much in the way you would a Hollywood narrative screenplay. I think we took a lot of the kind of writing tools and tricks and best practices and three-act structural guide rails that a narrative script would have, and we applied those, except we did it in post-production.
Right. So you took the pieces that you had and fit them into the puzzle that is the film structure.
Exactly. And in fact, and some of the pieces we didn't have, and we ended up writing them and then recording them in post production. This film had a really unusual writing process because the protagonist, Addie, loses his voice entirely during the making of the film. And what was so notable about that, not from a filmmaking standpoint, is normally when you're making a documentary, you just always are interviewing people, you're always talking to them, you want to put different parts of those interviews in different parts of the film, like, oh, this thing that we recorded recently, let's put that at the beginning of the film. We couldn't do that because Audie's voice had totally changed by the time we were done making the
Ah,
film from the way he
so it would
sounded at the
definitely feel
beginning.
out of sequence then.
Yes, exactly. It's one of the heartbreaking things about ALS, the disease that Audie has,
Hmm.
and sets him on this mission to fix the American healthcare system. And so we ultimately used a device, which was literally a device, Audie's recorded computerized voice, which he gets during the film. In the third act of the film, he suddenly gets this new tool to speak with his eyes. And we use that as the device to create the narration for the film that set up the beginning, middle, and third act of the story, that bookended the kind of verite
Uh-huh.
materials we didn't have. And that ended up being a really freeing device because we were ultimately able to write it the way you would write a voiceover script in our character's voice without that limitation
Oh,
of
yeah,
him losing
cool.
his voice. It was kind of our cheat code or workaround, and it was great. And the film was really well recognized. It got a writing nomination from the International Documentary Association, amongst other awards that it received. So the fact that the IDA documentary group has a writing award category is indicative of how important the writing process is for documentaries.
Cool. Is that particular film gonna be anywhere to watch, like on streaming, or is it gonna get theatrical
No, it
release?
is.
Or
It had a theatrical release in August of 21, and it just
oh,
premiered on Hulu 2 months ago. So
oh, well, great. Yeah, we'll
yeah,
have
it's up
definitely have to
there.
check it out.
And if you don't get Hulu, you can also rent it on Amazon Prime.
Gotcha. Cool. So, Addie, how did you find him? How do you find the subjects of all your various stories? How did those things come to you? Is it kind of like a epiphany in a moment, like, wow, look at this thing. This is a story we have to do.
Yeah, I've only directed two feature documentaries, and both of the times I've done that has been exactly what you described. I met somebody and I said, I want to set aside the next possibly 2 to 3 years of my life and dedicate them to telling this person's story. That, does not something that happens often. I know it's such a commitment to make a film like this. The first time it was the story of an undocumented immigrant who had left her daughter behind in Bolivia. That was my first film, called La Americana. And
Hmm.
then this time it happened with Addie, and I met Addie, who is the protagonist of Not Going Quietly. The story of the film, for folks who haven't seen it yet, is he's a young father and activist who has his life in front of him when he's suddenly diagnosed with ALS. And he goes and realizes that his story might matter in Washington as the Trump administration is debating tax cuts that would cut into healthcare. And he gets on a plane to go to DC, and on the way runs into Senator Jeff Flake, who at the time was the deciding vote on this bill, on the plane. And he goes up and he confronts the senator with his personal story. And the woman next to him on the plane films it with her phone. And then the video
Wow.
of this interaction goes viral. And Addie becomes the national face of healthcare. And this clip is on CNN and every other news outlet. And him and this woman who he just met set out on a tour across the country, fighting for healthcare, launched on the back of his newfound fame, all while he's losing his voice. And it's really his last road trip. Of course, he has a lot of great successes on the way, and even though ALS is a really devastating disease, Addie is still alive and still with us and still fighting the good fight that you see in the movie, which is really great. And he got to celebrate the premiere with us in Los Angeles when it opened theatrically at the Lemley, which was really an
Ah,
amazing moment,
hmm.
to have
I used
that.
to live near there.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it was at the Lemley
I used to
Royal.
live in NoHo, right around the corner from there.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah. It played in both the Lemley in Studio City, I think, and then the one in Santa Monica, if I'm
Cool.
getting that right.
Yeah.
My LA geography is not perfect, but yeah, I met
So
him.
when did you find out about Addie, and when did you join the production? Like, was it before that flight?
Yes,
Was that the
great question. It was right after the flight. The woman who we ran into on the plane, whose name is Liz Jaff, who's kind of the co-protagonist and his partner in crime in the film, is a political consultant, and I had some friends in common with her from the Obama campaign, because she had previously worked on for the Obama campaign in 2008 and 2012. And the reason that she got in touch with me was because, in addition to making independent feature films, of which I made three, two documentaries and one narrative, I also do all types of branded work, short form video for different political causes. I do work for a lot of nonprofits, a lot of social justice movements and organizations and foundations and government organizations through my production company, which is called
mhm,
People's Television. And
good segue?
she wanted to, yeah, it's a name drop. She wanted a short video to be made about this movement that her and this guy were launching. And she said, "Hey, I just met this guy on a plane. We're going to start this national tour where we're going to promote healthcare." Um, and I thought, okay, that sounds like an interesting sort of nonprofit type of story. Very sad, of course, but agreed to do it kind of as a client job. And then I flew out to meet Addie, and he was like the funniest, most loudmouth, cussing, kind of self-deprecating pothead, but like righteous activist, with this incredible story and sense of humor, despite being faced with this devastating diagnosis. And when they decided to actually get an old RV and hit the road, I knew there was much more to the story than just a short launch video. And so I talked to him and his wife and said, "Hey, we're gonna come along on this journey. The prerequisite is that we're going to do this our way, and it's going to be independent and journalistic and observational." And um, he agreed, and his wife, I think, slightly more reluctantly agreed, and we got our own RV and followed his in our production RV on the road for about 40 days through 22 states. This is right in the lead up to the 2018 elections. Now I can't believe how much time has passed, but I think it's still
Really?
very relevant. That was the last midterm election, and now those fights are happening again, across the country. So it was a really transformative experience, and really made all the more poignant by him losing his ability to walk and talk, and making such a huge impact on the election at that time. In the film, he's credited by the Democrats and Nancy Pelosi basically single-handedly for helping to win the election for Democrats in the midterms, which ultimately ends up setting the stage for a lot of the other important progressive victories, though few and far between,
Wow.
that we've had since.
Yeah. Actually, Roshni and I both come from like a print journalism background. I studied journalism in college. She was actually a reporter. And we were kind of taught never to like alter the subject, to be, very objective. But in a documentary, you spend so much time with the subject, and through the editing process, how do you feel like, what about the journalistic integrity? Do you have a point of view in your editing? How is that different from how is it different is documentary filmmaking different from news, I guess?
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, my thoughts are just evolving around this topic, as related to other projects that I'm working on right now. I don't think, and I haven't ever worked in the traditional news business, so I certainly don't speak with any expertise on that. But I don't think any kind of true objectivity is possible with documentary filmmaking. And I certainly share most of Addie's politics, and my sharing of them and wanting to give him a platform and elevate him was part of the reason to choose this subject. At the same time, I was very insistent that he would not have any editorial approval or control over the film. I'm very insistent in my projects that, with certain exceptions for very sort of specific reasons, that uh, folks usually should not be paid or compensated to be part of a documentary. There's a variety of nuance to that, but you want to make sure that there's not a conflict of interest in terms of their participation or what they're saying. But really, not giving your subjects control requires a huge amount of trust, because why would you let somebody else open your life and the inconveniences of having a crew in your home, as Addie did, for so long?
Hmm.
And that, so building that trust is really important to getting that release form signed that says somebody's going to have the control over how all of these images are put together. And we were I think the reason that Addie agreed was because he knew that an independent lens on him would do more to uplift his platform and his voice and his mission in his life than a hagiography that he controlled and would be a long commercial for his political movement. That was what we didn't want to do. And I think the reason we didn't want to do that was not for journalistic credibility, but really because actually doing something real, where you show the warts and all of somebody, you don't let them be a saint. You see Addie kind of getting high in the movie, and wrestling with whether he should be leaving his child for these long periods of time during his illness, and being very vulnerable in many ways. All of those things ultimately make the film better, and therefore the advocacy more impactful. So I think I went into the
Hmm.
film knowing that I believed in this mission, and didn't distance myself from it, but at the same time wanted to make the film that served audiences and not him, and keeping
Hmm.
the audience perspective in mind and going in with skepticism was really important.
Okay. So yeah, so you were able to put yourselves in the audience position of wanting to tell the story as truthfully as possible without, letting the subject take control of it and drive that narrative. So you were, definitely trying to be the observer, the journalistic side of it from that perspective.
Exactly. And it was tough because, look, this guy was, we try not to use the word dying because we say Adi is living with ALS and he's still alive,
Mhm.
and he could be with us for a very long time. This is discussed in the film as well. But this is somebody I care about a lot and is my friend. And that always happens when making documentaries. So it's a really nuanced topic.
Mhm.
And that relationship between director and subject, the word subject has been related to this conversation because a lot of people are saying now in the documentary industry that maybe the relationship between a subject is not the is more feudal than we'd want to have in this.
Mhm.
Maybe we should think about people as participants or protagonists or collaborators.
Mhm.
So that even that terminology speaks to some of the shifting thoughts, and a lot of people have a lot of great um, explorations of the issues you're raising around ethics and documentary that I um, would look to
Yeah.
for guidance.
You brought up the fact that you don't pay the subject for one, but on the other side of that, who pays you? You spend 2 years of your life making a documentary film. There's a lot of expenses involved in it. There's a lot of, travel. There's, it costs money. And then documentary films aren't always known for having great returns on their investment. So how does that work? And I guess that probably comes into play with, getting into people's television a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, that's really, you can't really talk about documentary filmmaking. Sorry, I'm in Manhattan right now.
I'm like, yeah, where do you
Yeah,
live?
I live in the Washington Heights neighborhood of Manhattan, which is not known for being particularly serene.
They're having a party.
And I'll start over, which is to say that you can't really talk about for any filmmakers in the audience, I don't think it's really worth having a panel or discussion about documentary filmmaking without really talking about the economics and finance of it, which is um, difficult. I don't think it's getting any easier necessarily, despite the market uptick, especially for kind of independent, long form, risk taking stories like this one. Um, we were able to secure some grants for the film from the International Documentary Association I mentioned earlier, as well as from Rooftop Films and a number of other organizations that supported us. We were also able to set up fiscal sponsorship for the film, which is like a nonprofit umbrella that can accept
Mm-hmm.
charitable contributions for the film. This is a really important tool, I think, for most independent artists and documentary filmmakers who want to accept contributions rather than investment. And we also ended up partnering with the Duplass Brothers Productions, who gave us a equity investment into the film, which allowed us to complete production. But as you pointed out, kind of scraping all of that together was complicated. We had to do it at the same time as making the film, which meant that our cash flow was often negative during it. And
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned the production company. I was very fortunate. I was in a very fortunate position that the production company was able to put some investment into the film themselves, and not every independent filmmaker has that kind of resource or backing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think and yeah, that money, those monies have to be paid back from an investment standpoint. And we were able to sell the film to a couple of different buyers, to PBS for broadcast, to Vice for the international rights, who streamed it outside of the U.S. The international rights are actually very important and lucrative for a documentary that might have international angles to it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately to Hulu in the US, and recoup most of what we put in. But it was tough slog. And my perspective on this, which I think is not the same for other filmmakers, is to really have one foot into the branded world where I'm doing the kind of social impact storytelling that I care about, working with the kinds of organizations that you mentioned in my bio, because it's a way for me to have kind of a sustainable, steady, um, reliable kind of income stream to do storytelling that matters and to collaborate um, with other filmmakers without my income being totally dependent on just being a documentary director, which I think, you can do it, but it's like getting into the NBA. It's got to be, it's
You got
going
to
to
be
be
Werner Herzog
exactly.
or Al Gore or something like that.
Exactly, or a lot, a dozen or two other, and everybody has their own path to making it, and the narrative industry is no different. It's less likely in documentary that you make your one feature and then suddenly you're doing the next Jurassic Park or whatever, which can
Yeah.
happen, and again, but that's tough on the narrative side too. So everybody's got their own path, and I think this question you're asking about sustainable careers in documentary is a much longer and different topic, and maybe we're getting too far away from the writing of it all. But one
Yeah.
thing I advocate for is just for people to really have a craft other than directing, or a craft that is marketable, that can allow you to sustain yourself, and a craft that is within the industry, right? So, can you, if you want to direct, can you also edit? Because I
Mm-hmm.
think um, editing is just such a important prerequisite to directing, to knowing what you want on set, whether for narrative or documentary. And it's such a high demand skill. It's so hard to find documentary
Mm-hmm.
editors these days. They're getting paid $5,000 a week easily.
Wow.
So if you can, for good ones. So if you can have that skill and cut your teeth doing that and have a great fallback, that's going to give you the skills, the training, instead of kind of trying to come straight out and just direct your magnum opus. It's just something that I speak a lot at schools,
Mm-hmm.
and am often engaged in these questions around how to do it. And for me, it's been really doing a lot of commercial work, but commercial work for organizations that I care about.
But your commercial work is also, in a lot of ways, like mini documentaries in some cases. or they're nonfiction, productions, to
Yeah,
say
it's
the
true.
least.
It's true. We do some
Yeah.
kind of more standard commercials, but our sweet spot at People's TV is doing this type of kind of nonfiction branded storytelling that shows the real people and the real impact in on a variety of topics, criminal justice, environmental issues. It's a really powerful method to engage people. It's a medium that people consume, I think, more than the written word. And obviously, um, people are just looking at videos all day on their phones, and certainly the taste and the medium is changing a lot in terms of vertical video and TikTok being the dominant media consumption habits these days. But I think that brands, nonprofits really need good stories told if they're going to advance their
Yeah.
causes. So that's kind of a niche that we found at the company, and we're doing well with that.
How long has People's Television been in business?
So I formed it in as a company in 2011, but it really was just me back then. I was, I don't know, 26 years old, I think, and didn't, was kind of at the place where I'm describing for others of kind of, using my craft and freelancing so that I could try to get my films made. But then over time, I was able to attract bigger clients, find great people to work with and partner with, including our creative director, Ryder Hask, who runs our DC office, and was also the cinematographer on Not Going Quietly. And the result today has been really great. We now have 21 people on the team across two offices. And so for me now, it's a lot about finding the balance between running the business and supporting those stories and the filmmakers on our team while also telling the stories I want to tell. And I'm currently, in production on two different feature doc projects. So
Hmm.
balancing those different efforts.
Yeah. Do you see yourself getting into any of the campaigning coming up in the next couple of years?
That is a good question. Do you mean campaigning like doing political ads or?
Well, that or documenting it. It's some the politics of today is some of the most intriguing in our history.
Yes, I agree. I mean, the thing about the Addie's about Not Going Quietly is I think it's a very hopeful look. It is a very political story, and it's a very hopeful look at what a small group of concerned citizens can do, as the famous Margaret Mead quote says.
Hmm.
But I also look at a lot of political stories going on and find them to be, less hopeful. And
Yeah.
I think most people, even when they hear about Not Going Quietly, they think like, oh, that sounds like a bummer. Like he's got ALS. Like, I don't know if I want to watch that. But I think if you do actually tune into it, you'll see it's full of a ton of uplift and even has a happy ending, which I won't spoil here. That I think is the kind of thing that makes people galvanized and want to take action as opposed to just being kind of angry at the many
Yeah.
injustices all around us. So yeah, if I found that right kind of story of uplift, something that you actually want to watch. I think that's tricky with documentary, right? It's like there's people interestingly want to watch true crime, right? Which is about as dark as it gets. And
Hmm.
that's something people, engage with. And then at the other end, I think people want to feel um, good. They have difficult
Yeah.
lives and difficult work and inflation and the economy, and you just get home from work and you turn on Netflix. Are you going to watch
Hmm.
my documentary about healthcare? Like, yes, but only if it's going to make you feel good and inspired. And so I
Yeah.
want to do stories that do that.
What do you have to say for the aspiring documentary filmmaker out there? Any advice? Any suggestions for how to get started?
Well, I mentioned already the importance of finding a marketable craft within the documentary industry, and that I think is really key. There's a lot of opportunity. The medium in general is booming, and there's just a huge need for every level of post production craft. I mean, there's just like I said, editors are in huge demand, colorists, sound mixers. Um, there's need for writers on documentaries as well. And on the production side, same. I mean, learn to get to be a great DP or a great sound recordist. There's a lot of great directors who record the sound, and have a DP as opposed to the traditional shooter director that people might think of. So I think it's really important not to obsess about the tools, but to learn the protocols and the operations of set and post environments. And the important thing about that, probably the most important thing about that, is you're going to find your people. You're going to find your collaborators in that way. And documentary is just absolutely a team sport. There's long list of credits on Not Going Quietly, from my producer Amanda to the editor Kent to the whole list of cinematographers that work closely on it, and yeah, you need to find people that you're going to want to be in a room with for those couple of years that some of these
Mm-hmm.
projects take. And that's not an easy task. And so that networking and that team building and that camaraderie and finding that network is just the most critical thing to having any success in the industry.
Cool, cool. If people want to learn more or want to reach out to you, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my DMs are open on Twitter and Instagram. It is Nick_Bruckman on Twitter, Nicholas Bruckman on Instagram. And you can check out more at peoples.tv, PEOPLES.tv for the production company. And Not Going
Yeah,
Quietly film.
don't forget the S on the peoples, because if you go People TV, you wind up like People Magazine. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, peoples.tv. Yeah, I would love for people to check out Not Going Quietly on Hulu. It's at notgoingquietlyfilm.com, where you can just type it in wherever movies flow.
Awesome. Thanks so much for spending some time with us. It was really great to hear about it, and I'm excited. I'm going to go to Hulu and watch the full documentary of Not Going Quietly. So that's going to be. I'm really looking forward to that. So. All right. Well, keep us informed of what you're doing. Yeah, I will. Keep us informed of what you're doing. If you got anything new coming up, we'd love to have you back.